Welcome everyone to Therapeutic Astrology Podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm back after having been sick for a little while. I lost my voice. Yeah, that's the worst that can happen for a podcaster to not be able to say anything. So I'm so happy to be back, and I'm really happy to be together with our author today, David Stokes. Welcome.
Hi, hello, Mana.
Hi.
Am I pronouncing your name correctly? It's Mana.
Yes, I love
Yeah,
the way you say it.
that's
It's so good. And your book is Masquerade at the Crossroads of Good and Evil. And
that's
the
right.
undertitle is Holism and Spirit Work in Mental Health and Addictions.
That's
And
correct.
I just want to begin by saying that I don't know if I can give this book the credit that it deserves. I don't know how to say what I've read. It was such an experience. It's a very special book. And it's, of course, also very special because it mirrors many of my experiences, having also worked in social work. But it's more than just experiencing experiences from social work. It's like a certain worldview that you're expressing. Um, yeah. So where should we begin with this? Do you think?
Well, I mean, to kind of keep it simple, the book in its kind of best reading or its best essence, it was an attempt. It was the record of an attempt to make positive interventions in the lives of people, quite marginalized, suffering for very long periods of time, going through the system sort of again and again and again, not really getting very what you would call positive results.
Mm,
So really, it was a pretty desperate cases, you could say, which
yeah.
I found quite fascinating because that's where all the kind of deep questions came from. I was thinking to myself, well, you know, what's going on? How come these guys are still with the service? How come they're still being recycled back and that? There just doesn't seem to be any solutions.
Yeah.
So that's where my questioning sort of kicked in, and I began to look deeper. I began to look at all the kind of psychological models that we use, the psychological and the psychiatric models that are in place that we are kind of, you know, tuned into in some essence or other, oftentimes things handed on to us. I began looking into them, and then from there, kind of began questioning I guess, the deeper waters of what was going on. So it became quite philosophical. I know there's quite a lot of philosophical reflections. There's a lot of kind of, the parameters within the text are quite broad for something that is primarily a mental health problem.
Yeah, but that's what I love about it. That's what I love about it. It's like your description, even in the description of what you're actually doing in that social interaction, there's a philosophy or there's feelings anyway, and then you'll be like describing the situation, and then you'll have all these thoughts, and I love that. Anyway, I want to say something that you're saying in the book so people can follow along. You're
Hmm.
saying that we are spreading the spiritual short sightedness of our
Hmm.
mental health system globally. So we're spreading a spiritual short sightedness. Can you explain that? Because that also leads to this that we are all involved in an ongoing experiment at the crossroads.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, we're dealing with Western medicine, the biomedical model. We're dealing with Western psychiatry. So that's pretty much the template in which we were working, and that was our parameters. And there's a lot of very good reasons for that, and there's a lot of very good reasons why people are not encouraged to engage with their hallucinations. There's a lot of very good reasons behind that, and for many people, it would be very, very detrimental to their overall
Yeah.
development. And in all the various people that I was key working and that I was involved with, I was very conscious of that. I was very conscious of the fact that not everybody is going to benefit from um, the kind of holism that I was introducing. And oftentimes I just had to step back and keep a nice, kind of friendly, positive, upbeat approach and conform with everything that was in place and not, the first principle, first do no harm, not upset anybody. But there were a lot of cases where, people were asking me for things. They were begging for their view to be honored. They were literally were craving meanings, craving an input from somewhere other than that. This kind of approach was not helping them at all. So yeah, that's why I got into thinking in a more kind of broader way. Now, I guess what you would say, Western psychiatry is doing in its. I mean, I think it's a very very complex question, very very complex. But one of the psychiatrists I was working as part of a team with, she would go on a placement to a West African country, and whilst there introduce Western psychiatry, and also take with her lots and lots of psychotropic meds that were surplus. So stuff that was just lying around that hadn't been used. So she'd take that would be shipped off to this particular country. She'd go there, she'd do a placement, she'd come back, everything's, she had a great time, everything good. But so in a sense, of course, it was a kind of medicinal colonialism. It was kind of saying, well, here we've got all this stuff, and now we're going to kind of offload it onto you, and this is how we do things. So yeah, it goes into cultural discourses, and it oftentimes just was very discordant, and it was oftentimes, especially when it wasn't working among much of our own population, and then to try and introduce it to another culture, it seemed poorly thought out, and oftentimes at the back of all this reasoning, it was very hard to get past the profit principle within the pharmaceutical industry. It was very hard to get past that, that, well, at least we're selling this stuff. At least we've got someone to sell it. At least somebody's going to use it. So, unfortunately, the values of an age will filter through to every part of the culture that it's being disseminated from. So the values of our kind of hyper-consumerism were extending everywhere. So they were extending within our mental health system, and also when we were introducing this system as an alternative to people who are even not even living in this hemisphere, and saying, okay, all your stuff, all your tribal stuff, all your ritual stuff, all your coming of age, all your very, very deep-rooted, 1,000-year-old systems, all that kind of stuff is not really that good. But we have something here called psychotropic medication, and if you take it, and if you take it long enough, so that's was basically what this sense of extending this kind of limited model. And I'm not against medication. I think medication is great and it has its place. But sure, it was just part of the reasoning. This was part of my reasoning. And I was thinking to myself, well, okay, if this stuff is so good, why is it leaving people so unhappy? Why is everywhere I go, people are just, so many people are suicidal. I must add that I was working with a very, kind of a specific demographic within mental health. These guys were pretty tough cases.
Yeah.
They were pretty tough cases, and
Yeah.
a lot of people have interventions within mental health, as you know, and they have a period of reflection, maybe a period of hospitalization, a period of care and help within that hospitalization, especially if it's private, especially if they can afford it, and then go on a course of medication. And after a period of time, whatever's ailing them, perhaps it was quite rooted in a societal or in a deeply personal or in a relationship sense, and whatever was troubling them lessens, and they move on, and they've had a reasonably tolerable experience within mental health interventions. But the guys I was dealing with, well, they were pretty tough cases. So they were coming to me, and they were, they were suicidal, they were desperate, it was, and I started listening to them, and then I started using, I guess, whatever techniques I could. And the kind of holism I was using was just based across what they were looking for. So if they were looking for things, I was kind of honoring what was foremost in their hearts, whatever they were really, really hoping for. What I was doing well within the system, whatever was possible, I was honoring their deepest, most aspirations.
Yeah, and that's the thing, what is possible within the system, because like I said, I've also had a similar job. I could mirror myself in that job description, where it's like, oh, I have, our hours, 2 hours has gone, and I have to move on to the next sort of work. And so it's limited by the system. I mean, so you were very creative, and I'm sure you also had to be careful. And there's piece where you talk about Desmond and your thoughts about maybe that it could be demons that
Yes.
actually struggling with. But then to say that would be, you wouldn't be able to say that, right?
I think a lot of people might feel that in their own private thoughts. And I've spoken with, doctors, psychiatrists, community mental health nurses, psychiatrists who, because we don't know what their thoughts really are. Nobody's going to tell you what they're thinking, really. They'll tell you what's, expedient for them to tell you. So they're coming to the workplace, and they will reflect back to the workplace whatever it is, whatever the agenda of that day is. So in a lot of our kind of fields of endeavor these days, it is pretty kind of, it's hard science, it's materialism, it's the biomedical model. It's, you've got to have experiments. You've got to have experiments that can be repeated. You've got to have, which is good, because we don't want to be naive. We don't want to leave ourselves open to charlatans or frauds. So all the kind of people who expose all this stuff, they are, in my eyes, they're heroes. I think they're really great. All the people like, James Randi. Do you remember that guy, James Randi? He was in America. He was around exposing all these people. I think they're good, but apart from all that, there are other ways of looking at this, and there are ways of looking at this that possibly could be extremely effective. And within Masquerade, I started off with Gareth. Gareth was just interested in art, and we've seen some of his artwork, which was really interesting guy. And everything else was kind of okay, but tended to bore him. So if you spoke about anything else, he would get bored very quickly. But if you spoke about illustration, fine art, anything to do with drawing, anything to do with cartoons, representations, crayon, anything, he would take an interest. So most of our conversation had anything to do with his well-being and his betterment was kind of focused through art. So that's what we would talk about. That was our conversations. That was what we would do, and we had a lot of fun. He was a pretty interesting guy, and I kind of love art as it happens, and we kind of, that's how we communicate, and in that mode of communication, it was possible to introduce the other ideas that might possibly happen. With Desmond, sometimes I was just acknowledging that he was pretty limited, and he was limited because of very high doses of psychotropic medication. So, and also a kind of sort of living. I mean, the problem with certain levels of medication is that, when people are sedated, it's very, very hard to get the motivation to get up, to exercise, to go and do the things that are recommended to do, to get in your 8,000 steps or whatever it is. They just can't do it. And the food that on clozapine, as you know, the appetite is often accentuated. So there's a kind of excessive of food going in there and not much exercise. So often, and sedation on top of that. A lot of it. So with Desmond, it was more acknowledging that and accepting that, there wasn't going to be any great. There wasn't going to be any great, revelation of.
No.
Yeah, it was going to be. So it's just acknowledging where he's at, and looking at the possibility of demons affecting him as well.
Yeah, because then that's maybe your philosophy, a view of it, that there could be a very different explanation for it. Yeah, so we're talking about Desmond demons, and what you say about that is that the very mention of spirit possessions as a factor in cases of mental disorder is enough to stir deep emotions.
Yeah.
Like, this is not something you would say in a modern rationalist society.
No. There's a lot of cultural, reasoning behind that. The European mind has evolved past that. So, we've had in Europe, of course, we've had the medieval ages, we've had the Enlightenment, and we've had great power structures that were monopolizing spirituality. And these power structures were, pretty objectionable. And of course, we had this conflict between the more rational, literalist, Protestant reading of scriptures, and then the more kind of traditional Catholic. There's a lot of history. The 30-Year War, we had that, where people were just massacring each other. Right, they just turned Europe into a hill of bones. And we had the revolution. The French Revolution, where they just literally hung people from the religious orders and actually shot them and executed them. There was a massive conflict between people who saw themselves as being, progressive, science-based, textual, kind of analytical, and a kind of a more longer-lasting sort of state authority mixed with religion. So people really, really were very nervous of, they just associate anything to do with that the old days of repression, of a kind of a tyranny, really. And there was, even though it wasn't, I'm not a historian, but it wasn't kind of tyrannous for its entire. But there was moments of obvious tyranny where people were abused and people had no spiritual autonomy. And you could say, the whole of Europe was affected by it to one degree or other. In America is where everybody fled. So they got their, they got their ships and they went over to New England and they became Puritans and they built what they did over there. So, that's our legacy.
All that history, right? And then but you get the sense that there might be demons involved in this suffering, in this mental disorder.
Yeah, but we have to get past the cultural barrier. So there's a big cultural barrier. If you say to the modern European, the modern European will say, "Oh, I'm educated. I don't believe in that. I've been to college. I'm educated. I don't believe in anything like that." That's something that belongs to the medieval days, before the French Revolution, before the Enlightenment, before universal education, before equality in the modern age. So there's a lot of very kind of understandable objection to it. People just really don't want to go there, and they don't think. They would much prefer to either avoid that question entirely, or to just frame it in a different light. And I guess the most respectable way of framing it, and I think that's why he became so famous in the 20th century, he became a kind of a conduit between both worldviews, was of course Carl Jung. So if you say, well, okay, these things they're not demons, they're not, you know, extra spatial entities. They're actually subconscious energies
Yeah.
that are coming up from the subconscious mind, and they're intruding on the conscious thoughts and presenting as an overpowering experience. And that's probably what is more kind of palatable. But if you kind of go down the more traditional way, and you start thinking, well, maybe, yeah, maybe there is such a thing as demons. You kind of leave the room, really. You kind of leave the therapeutic space, and you go next door to the to the religious experience, and
Right.
you speak with the, you know, the pastors and the exorcists from the Catholic Church. They're still in it. They're still, of course, exorcists.
That's
And
that.
we speak to all the various cultures who have this kind of way of looking at the world within their culture. So that was a problem for people like myself, who was just trying to look as widely as possible at the
Yeah.
question. It was plausibility.
This is so good, David, and I hope that I've underlined for you and the listeners that I really recommend this book. It is so thought-provoking, it is so needed, and I'm so happy that you birthed it the way that you have. And also, we have limited time today because we have technical issues, right?
Okay,
We
okay.
have, so I'm just going to ask you this one last question, and of course
Hmm.
you can answer as long as you will. But
Hmm.
it's just this question of what the masquerade is. So you
Yeah.
talk about a masquerade, for example, as social workers, and I think it is connected to what we're just talking about, where we can become masters of masquerade, you're right. I think also in like not talking about the things that we might think is going on, the more creative way of thinking about mental disorders. What are, in what context are you talking about masquerade?
I guess the masquerade is a more creative way of talking about the social roles that we all assume every day, where we assume certain roles. We go into a business meeting or a meeting, and we are, you know, we sit up straight, we drink our coffee, we listen, we take notes, we're attendees. Uh,
Professionals. I like the way that you
yeah,
talk about professionals, right?
well, that's another problem is when you professionalize something too much, and then the actual pursuit of one's own advancement supersedes the actual goal of what it's all put in place for. So suddenly people are not thinking; they're only thinking really. They're thinking, well, I got to look after my career, my goals, my pet projects, my funding. I've got
Yeah.
to kind of consolidate
Yeah.
my status within the organization, and then people become offerings to that. They become very secondary to that, and I've seen it many times. So, and that's where the cruelty comes in. That's where the cruelty comes in. That's where people can be, and I've spoken to many people who've had mental health interventions, and they talk about this cruelty, how they were treated. And yeah, well, they were treated like that because their needs were secondary to the advancement of the professionals around them. So they were not being, of course, they were not to the fore of everyone's attention. What was to the fore of everyone's attention was their own, um, I guess, professional needs, their own
Yeah.
needs. So yeah, you can see that there's a lot of cruelty, and the cruelty just comes from this kind of trap that people fall into, where suddenly they're in a job, and the job becomes a means of personal survival in a very, very competitive world, and they're having to meet all those targets. They're having to do a lot of work, and the people who are coming, it's okay if you're just dealing with facts and figures. If you're just dealing with units of products or whatever, if you're on the symbol, if you're dealing with people,
We're
that's a
dealing with
problem.
human beings, right?
That's the problem,
Yeah.
especially human beings in very, very severe conflict, any crisis, and oftentimes struggle for their very lives. So that's where the problem comes. That's another problem that comes in, is this kind of these levels of professionalism that have developed over years. But to go back to
The Masquerade.
the masquerade, we all masquerade, and certainly in the workplace. If you want to do holistic work, if you want to look at people's, if you want to pray with people, if you want to really honor their spiritual views, honor their personal views, because people, as you know, people have got some very cranky, contrary views, and they don't fit with society's template. But that to them is their reality tunnel.
Yeah.
That's what they see. So, if we say, "Oh, no, that's," let's not talk about that. We have to talk about you going to your appointment in the morning and being there at 9 o'clock. Now that's another interest. I mean, in a sense, we have to kind of balance both those tensions.
That's the thing in social work. You have to fulfill those basic needs and help people get to their appointments and stuff like that. But then you're talking about this spiritual short-sightedness of saying, "Oh, you can't. This doesn't exist." Where I feel you suggesting, "No, go with it. Let's see how can we."
There are times when there's not much you can do. Only just listen as a friend, as a compassionate person who's just walking a little bit of the journey with them. There's a lot of time you can't do anything. But there are moments where suddenly you have an opportunity to make a difference. And that's what the book is about. It's about those opportunities. I think there's about a dozen instances, a dozen people who needed that little bit of creative input. All of them had a particular response that was a little bit outside the conventional mental health approaches. Tina, at the very end, you mentioned, we went and we gave a little commemoration to her when she died. We went to a local park. We read Margaret Mead's poem. Marcia, I never met her, but in the book I just honor the stress that she's going under and that she's subjected to, the stress that everybody in the modern world, everybody perhaps subject to the human condition goes through. With Kenny, at one point we did a little ritual. We did a little bit of a fire burning ritual, which helped him because he was an arsonist. So of course his eyes lit up. He loved that. And
something to burn. Yeah.
So it was all, what was possible.
Yeah.
It wasn't from me. I didn't set out with any kind of, I've got a great idea.
Right.
Let's go and implement this in the lives of the people. No, it wasn't. My idea was, okay, wow, there's a lot of people suffering.
Yeah.
Wow, there's just nobody seems that interested in listening to them. Let's see what can be done. So it was a pragmatic approach. And as I'm kind of interested in, esoteric affairs, I was able to use a bit of that where possible.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of basis of it, and that's really what it was about. And there's a lot of kind of, as I say, there's a lot of philosophical stuff thrown in there. And it can come across as a bit critical, but,
It is very critical.
Very critical, yeah, it's critical.
But it's supposed to be. I mean, we need to feel that anger at this time. If anything it can shift, it needs to come from inside where we feel this is not fair and this is not how it's supposed to be. Someone needs to say this. This is why I'm excited. Someone needs to say what you're saying. So
thank you. Yeah. So I didn't mean to be that critical. When I read back a page or two, it says, wow, that's very critical.
It's very critical.
Yeah. So
but it's also very heartfelt. Like you're just mentioning names of people that you've worked with and that you've helped and made a difference for. And they made a difference for you. That's the thing. It's not just we come as saviors. It's like whoa, this affects us as well as social workers.
I think it's honoring the one thing that we have. And the one thing that we can all agree that we have is life.
Yeah.
Everybody can agree on that. Even the most top psychiatrists in the world, or the most kind of, oppressed mental health sufferer, I'm sure if you ask what commonality, well, they both have life, and that's
Yes.
something that we have. So it was primarily an honoring of that, honoring of life, and saying, listen, life, and looking around to see how can this be enhanced? How can we talk about this? How can we really make this important? How can we kind of honor this mystery of life that we all have? And
Yeah.
why is it so burdensome? And why is it causing so much grief? And why is it all these dreadful, dreadful problems that are happening? And how can we get around them? So how can we improve them, or how can we help people to at least, live some sort of tolerable life? So that was the basis for it. The criticism, yeah, I mean, I guess it was what used to annoy me personally was the kind of, I wouldn't say it was indifference. It was more, um, it was a kind of a sense of this is the system and
Yeah.
this is the way it is.
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
and
You
if
can't do anything
we're
else than that.
yeah, and we don't care if you think the cosmos is a living entity. We
Yeah.
don't care what your voices are saying to you. We don't care if you think you're a prophet and you have many things to impart to us. We don't particularly care about what you're saying because it sounds ridiculous and pompous. We really want to just show you a template that you have to conform to. And if you conform to it, so it became rudimentary and reductive, and
Of course. Of
then
course. Yeah.
suddenly we lost touch of we lost touch with what we were doing there, and
Yeah.
suddenly we're just kind of going through these procedures, and that's what I was
Exactly.
kind of reacting to. I was kind of reacting to.
I'm glad you did. David Stokes, thank you so much for being here. I hope to connect to you again when we have a better audio environment.
I'm so sorry.
But
Yeah, it's probably all my fault because
it's
I'm
surely
pretty
not,
lousy with technology. So maybe I've pressed a button I shouldn't have pressed. I'm not sure.
whatever it is. I'm really glad that we just got to connect here. And thank you so much for writing the book and for speaking to us about it.
Thank you, Mena.